Welcome to Dark Loops and the What If Crew, a podcast for discussing the new Marvel series, What If? I'm your host, Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher from Illinois State University. And tonight we discuss episode 2, What If T'Challa Became Star-Lord? Fellow members of the What If Crew, please introduce yourselves and say a few words about why you like this show, just a few words, and we'll start with Daniel.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Daniel, but when I'm in the geek space, such as now, I use my pen name, which is the Pomp Mythologist. Very happy to be sort of like a recurring guest as part of this podcast. Sorry. I like the What If series and the concept in general, and was always a fan of the comics because, I mean, honestly, I felt like it explored some of the most interesting ideas in the Marvel universe, be it in the mainstream comics universe or any of the alternate universes in the comics or any of the universes in the MCU. And as we had discussed the last episode, it was one of the most interesting, like 30 minutes in the MCU. So that's why I love the show so far and like talking about it.
Excellent. How about you, Stanford?
What If for me, I mean, especially when I read the comics, it's always been interesting, but it's always been hit or miss for me. Because I feel like sometimes the writers are always trying to just validate what happened in the comics. It's like, what if such and such hadn't happened, and we see how terrible life would have been, right? And one of the things that I wish that they had the courage to do would be to do more what if episodes that actually show that they messed up. That show that like
what if we had done it right?
Yeah, but that's the thing. What if always felt like it's like, what if we had done it wrong, right? Show me that like if we had made a different decision, we would have had a better world.
There you go.
And I think, and actually that leads into what I've liked about these first two episodes, is neither of the episodes actually end on a note that makes me feel like, oh, somehow we're proving that we made the right decisions.
Fair enough.
Because they both play out in ways where you're like, oh, it's a different world, but it's not a worse world.
Right.
Right. And so in that way, I actually, so far, I like I like what I'm seeing in the show a lot more than I like the comic book.
Oh, there you go. Fantastic. How about you, Eric?
Answer.
Well, so I'm, Eric Wesselmann, and I'm a psychologist, and some of my enjoyment of this series is going to dovetail with probably what I discuss later on. But one thing that I do want to point out about the show, as well as the comics generally, is that they don't necessarily have to be beholden to canon. Right. I mean, they really can play, whether it's making the world better, the same, just different or worse. They don't have to have the same type of editorial constraints that they would have in a regular run. So that's just fun.
No, excellent. So what I love about this series is the way it makes us feel like something was canon, right? In other words, someone created a story, we all read it, we all watched it, we have a sense that that's just real in the sense that we all watched it, and now someone comes and does a spin on it that makes us feel like that spin might be imagination, but that wasn't. And I like how that contrast just sort of shows us that these are all stories, and that one of the groovy things about being a human being is actually being able to say, what if, and try things differently and never take a certain answer too seriously. So, gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce tonight's special guest, the one, the only Dr. Marty Lloyd, or Martin Lloyd. Marty, please introduce yourself, say hello, and tell us your favorite superhero character and why.
Sure. Before I get to my history with what if question that everyone else is taking, or I'm a forensic psychologist currently practicing out of Minnesota, and like everyone else here, I've been involved in various forms of geekdom for most of my life, including comic books, including what if comic books. But my favorite superhero, simple answer, I guess, but has always been Superman. And even if I go to, say, limiting it because we're talking about the MCU to my favorite Marvel hero, it's Captain America. And so I tend to gravitate towards these more inspirational and I suppose also aspirational heroes. To some extent, I think that I gravitate towards the heroes that I see less of myself in, actually, because as someone who grew up as not particularly a religious person, I think that I looked to comic books and sort of some of the morality of comics as sort of a guidepost for me. And I can relate really well to sort of like the more cerebral kind of characters like Doctor Strange, or even kind of the angrier, broodier characters like Batman. But I don't see a ton of myself as being that person who inspires like I see in Superman or Captain America. And so that was something that I think I needed in my life as kind of to have this guideline, but also something I saw that was more the character that I wanted to be, as opposed to the character that I saw myself as.
Man, can we just give Marty a clap for that fantastic answer? I'll tell you what, you just said, you know what, we're going to have to do a post-series episode on the mythological status of heroes, right? Because the psychological space, the psychological boundaries of imagination provided to you by these characters are things that others garner out of biblical characters and such. So I'd love to have that conversation.
That
so
would be
look,
fantastic.
We're so glad to have you here tonight, Marty. And what we're going to do, we all have favorite lines, favorite characters, favorite scenes, favorite themes from this episode. So what I do is I just open the floor to whoever wants to talk about a favorite theme, line, character, scene, etc., and we'll go from there. So the floor is open.
I guess I'll go first. No, Marty, please.
No,
Dr. Lloyd, please.
Thank you. Well, first of all, though it's not going to be the bulk of my answer, I do want to just have a shout out to just the joyful performance by the episode's other Black Panther, Jimon Hansu, who did the voice of T'Challa in an animated series previously, but took kind of what was a throwaway character almost from Guardians of the Galaxy and just gave one of the most delightful performances that I could have. That was really fantastic. But for me, my favorite part of the episode, I think, is more thematic, and that's the way that in this episode, T'Challa stands in some ways for the writers of this kind of alternate universe type story in a way, because, and I think I'm dovetailing a little bit with something that Eric said in the introductions, but the writers doing these kinds of stories are free to play, and they're free to play without the sort of the limitations of having to protect an IP for future usage, or even really of marketability to some extent. They're just free to tell the best story they can, to just do whatever is fun for them. And in this universe, the way that I think T'Challa kind of stands for that is we see a T'Challa who was free to play. He was unburdened by so much. He didn't have the responsibilities of having to one day become king, though perhaps he will be at some point, but he was free from the limitations of being royalty, of not being able to leave the bounds of Wakanda, and also to some extent, the things that limited him in terms of Wakanda's isolation, the things that kept Wakanda separate, having to deal with sort of the vestiges of colonialism that existed outside their borders, the systemic racism that's, everywhere outside their borders, and that kind of limits what they're able to do. And he got to grow up essentially without all that. And what we see is this T'Challa who's able to play ultimately ends up being, if anything, more effective than he was in the mainstream MCU. And we're talking about a pretty effective character, but I mean, this is a guy who just, he talked Thanos out of genocide. That was amazing. This something that, granted, he never had the opportunity to do, but he didn't really do anything like that of that magnitude in this. And he's, and he's able to do all this. And not to mention, redeeming the Ravagers completely, turning them to a completely, that whole Robin Hood or Robin Leach path, if you will.
Exactly.
Turning them into that, while at the same time, Cha-Cha, he's having a good time.
Yes.
more so than I think he ever did in anything we'd seen him in. And I just thought that was really great, and really great to see Chadwick Boseman's final, really, I assume probably his final actual performance, being able to deliver that.
That
And
alternative,
yeah, I thought there was something really special about that, I thought.
Yeah. Very special, a wee bit haunting, to hear the voice now and hear it run that way.
So Marty, one of the things I that you said I really liked was a discussion of sort of, if T'Challa were to be king again in this particular universe, right? And from the original Black Panther film, part of that T'Challa, the canon T'Challa's growth, was Nakia challenging him to think beyond the sort of isolationist perspective that Wakanda had historically, and so because she went out and saw the world, right? In this case, this T'Challa is seeing all the worlds, right? And so, what type of then perspective would he have brought as when he takes over as king on Earth? That'd be a fascinating story to to flesh out.
And I think there'd be something similar in that we'd see a less isolationist Wakanda, but in a very different way. I mean, this is going to be the Wakanda that is essentially the port of entry for first contact for the world, for all intents and purposes. I mean, so that is, a whole different thing, I think.
No, it's fantastic. Anybody else? Favorite scene, favorite line, favorite character, favorite theme? Daniel, why don't you go ahead? You were going to jump in earlier.
Well, it was interesting. I was thinking before we came on that whatever sort of different thoughts and opinions we were going to discuss today, I think probably there's one point that on some level we can all agree on, which is it was quite special to hear Chadwick Boseman utter entirely new lines. I mean, the coming this far or this late after his passing, it almost feels like some kind of like miracle. Like if you didn't know how these things work, the scheduling and the recording and all that kind of stuff, it's like, oh my God, he's back from the beyond. It really was kind of magical and special. But my favorite scene actually kind of relates to that in a way, and that's at the very end when he decides out of all the different places to go. Yondu's like, it's up to you. Where's your heart telling you that we should go next? And of course, so he goes to Wakanda. And it's like this kind of coming home, but to me, there was a symbolic significance of it where it felt almost like here's this crazy alternate universe where Chadwick Boseman died of cancer, but but now he actually, this is the real one where he's back now, and he kind of reassumes his rightful place and role as the Black Panther of Wakanda. It just felt like magical for me.
No, that's fantastic.
One of the things that I thought was really a couple of things I thought was interesting. Now, first of all, like my favorite line, it's actually my favorite lines were pretty much all Korath, Jaimin Hansu's character. Like we kept saying classic Star-Lord, right? And the reason why I thought that was interesting is this show actually really put in high relief the extent to which Star-Lord is just a jerk. Right? like we really start to see what it means for Star-Lord, like the implications of what it means for Star-Lord to be a basically lowest common denominator white guy put into a cosmic setting. And I thought that I thought that what was interesting is that like Jaimin Hansu, the first time he sees him, it's like, oh, classic Star-Lord, right? So this idea that this is the way Star. Every time he said that, it was like he was saying to me, "Oh, you are the way Star-Lord. You are what Star-Lord was always supposed to be, right?" And in that way, it kind of asserted a realness that I haven't really seen in an alternate history narrative. I also thought that I also love the fact that there was an incredible optimism it's not just to the Chadwick Boseman Star-Lord, right? But also in terms of the other characters, like we talk like Jaimin Hansu, in the original Star, like he's a very grim character. All of a sudden, like what does it mean to take one character and make them, give them optimism, dignity, and a desire to go above the lowest common denominator? And how does that affect everyone around them? And I felt like the apex of that was at the very end when he shows up and he's in Wakanda, and his dad's alive and his mom is there, and they're like, well, how did you end up with them? And like there's this moment where you're waiting for something bad. He said, I was lost and they found me. Right? Like I thought it was interesting that even realizing because even he had already had the confrontation with Yondu about that, even realized all of that, he still took the most optimistic read on the most traumatic thing in his history and used it to transform the moment, because that transformed that moment into a moment where the Ravagers become Wakandans, right? Like they're all together. It brings everyone together where we realized that if he had just said what we expected him to say, it would have been chaos, right? And instead, it's like he rose to the moment with his spirit.
All right, we can't drop our mics because they're attached to our headphones or such, but if we could, we would. That was pretty awesome. I mean, for me, what they did was let that character be the same person he's been in canon, but put him in a different context that allowed different aspects of his character to sort of come to the fore. And that spirit of still being responsible for the well-being of others, still realizing the impact in the moment to say, I was lost and they found me. That's regal, right? And even though he'd been hanging around with a bunch of star pirates for a long time. So I agree. That was fantastic. Anyone else? Favorite line, character, scene?
Actually, if I could riff on what
Please
Stanford
do,
said, because you brought up something that was possibly my other favorite part of the episode. That one thing I really like about this is that it kind of points out that I think what we all knew on some level, that Peter Quill is the least valuable player of the MCU. It just hands down. I mean, if you think back to Infinity War, no matter how many millions of alternate futures Doctor Strange looked at, Quill screws things up in all of them. Because if there's a point in that fight scene at the end of Infinity War when Spider-Man and Iron Man almost have the gauntlet, at which point it would all be over, but Quill stops that because he can't think past his own needs. And there's apparently no version of reality in which he doesn't screw that up. It happens all the time. And so here we see that, if you get someone else as Star-Lord, maybe they wouldn't even have to be as competent as T'Challa. They'd still be doing better than Quill.
That's hilarious. Yeah. And my sense was all that was actually done quite intentionally by the writers. I don't think that was an accident. I really do think they were trying to tell a story like that. Anyone else?
So my favorite line was from the Watcher at the beginning, where they asked the question, is your destiny determined by your nature or by the nature of your world? Right. So this is something I've always appreciated about What If, because it speaks to me as a social psychologist. So, one of the sort of truisms in our field is focusing on the power of the situation, right? It doesn't matter what people say they would do, put them in the actual situation and see what they do, right? And we'll say 75% of the time, it's not what they expect, right? But in reality, things are a bit more complex, where we debate, I guess, at this sort of larger level, nature versus nurture, right? And, we have traits, dispositions, some of them inborn or perhaps inherited, some of them are acquired, and it's all a mix. And we spend our time as psychologists trying to carve all these sources into little pieces and study them systematically. And we think we kind of approximate that. And then here in these stories, we get to play with that in a fictional, I guess, safe realm, and then just see how we think it might go. Roll the dice and where you go. And I love that.
That's fantastic. I mean, when you're a writer and you write a canon and then you riff on the canon, that double diagnoses how you sit in the world of nature versus nurture, if you even think that way. So for me, for example, I love what they did with Chala. As you said, Marty, and the things you said, Stanford, I loved all that. And I would say that all of that was consistent with Chala's character in the MCU, right? It was a different context, so different degrees of freedom came out and how he expressed himself. I got to say, the character I thought they had the most fun with was definitely Thanos. And I loved how he tried to get people in these conversations about, yeah, man, it was going to be like totally random. And what I was totally surprised by was nobody said, well, dude, that means half those snaps, you'd have been gone, right? I mean, nobody talked about the fact that his 50-50 was rigged and he wasn't going anywhere. And I was a little surprised they didn't push that button because it would have been delightful. But I loved the redescription of Thanos, right? And I loved how he becomes kind of self-sacrificing in the end, right? Trying to help the team, sacrificing himself. Sacrificing himself intentionally versus sacrificing others randomly. And I think that difference in his character was fun to see. So I absolutely love what they did with Chala. And at the same time, I would argue that was the same character, but different circumstances giving rise to different expressions of that character. Thanos was the one that I think they pushed the hardest character-wise. And I thought it was delightful. Thanos fighting the Black Order was just fantastic. It was thoroughly entertaining.
And Thanos as an embarrassing dad.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, because you notice his relationship with Nebula's a little bit more healthy, perhaps, and certainly she only has the robotic eye, right? She has the rest of her organic limbs.
Yeah.
So, T'Challa obviously changed Thanos' perspective before that type of conflict between him and Nebula. So.
It's also interesting to see Nebula get that kind of attention because, for the most part, Nebula always appears in movies where there's also a Gamora, and I feel like Gamora always overshadows her. Like even in Infinity War in Endgame, where Nebula actually had a lot more to do, I still felt like Gamora just completely overshadowed her character. And I think that. I think it was also really smart of the writers to pick up on that. Like that they picked up on the fact that there's no conceivable way for Gamora to end up in Thanos' orbit if he doesn't believe in wiping half the universe out. Because it's so integral to their origin, right? Because he kills half that planet. Yeah.
Right. True.
A lot of times I see a lot of times in what if stories, and I guess I'm perennially going to be tying this to the comic, is that they miss out on little things like that because they're like, I want to use this character, right? And I felt like what they did do, what I thought was, and it did in an interesting way, was they're like, these really are the characters that should be there, and even though these other characters are really popular, I don't see how they're going to end up there. We didn't have Rocket and Groot either. Right.
True.
And Drax had a really small part.
Yeah.
And I think that it's interesting when writers are comfortable like pulling those kinds of punches, like they realize it's like, if I'm going to say this, if I'm going to commit to this idea, then these really are the ramifications.
So let me follow up on that. Do you think a lot of that has to do with, the financial constraints on trying to keep a comic book series going in the 70s and the 80s and 90s versus the kind of money that Disney's been pumping into this sort of thing where in other words, they're encouraging people, I think they are, to write better scripts, to write more complicated characters. There's an audience who's willing to pay subscription TV and go to the movies to have it. It's not unlike the whole cable TV phenomenon where instead of the middleman, right, that I pay like an advertiser who pays to have space and then I buy their product and that's how I get to see it for free on television. I just pay a fee to someone and they show it to me directly. So, are there better stories now because there's more, I don't want to say more money, but people can spend more time doing more complex plots.
Well, so I was reading.
I mean, what if, man?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I was reading an old mid '90s trades magazine. It wasn't Wizard, but it was kind of in that vein, and they had published a roundtable discussion with Todd McFarlane, Peter David, a bunch of other popular comics creators at the time, talking about what makes good villains and what doesn't. And one of the things that one of the creators brought up was that they were annoyed when good villains were overused. And I think in this particular portion, they were talking about Venom. And they were like, well, this is the hot villain right now, so everyone wants to use them, possibly because it would increase sales, right?
Yep.
But then, yeah, it does sort of diminish the power of that character. And as Stanford pointed out, reduce the degrees of freedom writers have to use other characters who might be more logical, just not as popular.
Very well said. Yeah.
But I think this also shows one of the big differences between Marvel Comics and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think that the Marvel Cinematic Universe sees more value in the Marvel Universe, whereas the comic book company sees more value in the individual properties. Because like I could think of a lot of ways in which they could have made these first two episodes of What If much more marketable by shoehorning another character in. If they had found some way to make Winter Soldier show up and Captain Carter, right?
Well, Bucky did.
Pardon?
Bucky was there. Yeah.
Bucky was there. No, but I'm talking about as Winter Soldier.
As Winter
right?
Soldier, sure.
Yeah. Because Bucky is not as marketable as Winter Soldier, right?
Well, but with Captain and Carter in charge, Bucky would have never been caught, right? I mean, she was competent.
And I thought
Just
it was
making
interesting that they called her Captain Carter and not Captain Britain.
Right.
Again, letting they seem to see the value in the Marvel universe, not the particulars of every Marvel character. Because I'll be honest, I don't find Nebula to be a super interesting character, but I respect and I really liked what they did with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she's a bad character. I'm not trying to say that, but I also thought was interesting was like the little epilogue at the end where Ego shows up and Chris Pratt is just like sleeping at a movie theater, and you get the sense that, oh, okay, so now we see what Chris Pratt's going to be the next villain. I mean, that's the big bad. Whatever Ego and Chris Pratt become together, or Peter Quill become together, that's going to be the big bad of the Marvel universe. That's going to be that universe's Thanos, right?
That's awesome.
So I liked what they did, and something else I liked about it was, let's get back to the mechanics of the storytelling. I loved that they still kept with a similar animation style, but you could tell that they changed it a little bit. You know what I mean? They gave it sharper edges. They gave it a different color scheme. Whereas the first one was kind of reminiscent of some of the animation that you would get out of the 40s on the big screen, right? This one had a little more of an anime feel to it.
Totally
Totally
did.
And so yeah, I thought that was also really, really, really interesting that they managed to do that. And it just made it fun. It made it fun that they made another decision that was specific to this story. It was like they really said, this is What If, tell us a good story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And 3x in 30 minutes. And it's been brilliant both times. Yeah. I mean, it's a good 30-minute story. Eric, I interrupted you.
Oh, sorry. Your Stanford's point about another thread that probably won't be developed, just because I'm sure they're going to move to different stories, but Peter Quill, right? I mean, so in the original canon story, right, yes, he may be somewhat ineffectual, as we discussed earlier, but he was raised with a family of sorts. It was kind of odd perhaps, and Yondu may not have necessarily been the most doting parent, but he was still surrounded by people who cared about him, right? And so, presumably in this universe, Peter Quill's mom still died of cancer, right? And we don't know if he was surrounded with supportive individuals to help him through that trauma.
Right.
What would happen? How would he be very different?
What if?
Yeah.
Marty?
Yeah, with that earlier question though, in terms of, so why is Disney, not necessarily going the marketable route? I think one thing we do have to accept, just in kind of realistic terms, is the money that's being spent on these episodes is not something Disney cares about. So they are free to let the writers do, whatever they need to do separate from marketable concerns. And the thing that really showed that to me was that same epilogue that Stanford mentioned. I mean, how much would it have cost to get Kurt Russell to come on for like one line? I just noticed, I'm like, they just threw that because whatever, we don't care. And it's like, it adds very little, but sure, if you want to do it, yeah, we'll give him whatever he needs. That's fine. I mean, this is a company that was recently reported, in order to get the sole film rights to Spider-Man, is thinking about maybe just going ahead and buying Sony. Like they have money to throw around.
Yeah,
Wow.
no, they do. And there is an audience for the level of nuance we're seeing in this show, right? In order for this show to flesh itself out for you at every level, you have to basically know canon. You have to know when they're violating canon. You have to know when they're violating the comics, when they're violating the movies. No, even if you don't, there's still a good story there. But to get the full depth of what they're doing, all that's got to be there. And that's a particular audience. And they're catering to it, and people are paying for it. It's yeah. Go ahead, Stanford.
Well, one thing that's interesting about what Marty said is it actually comes back to something that I mean, Scott and you and I have talked about this, about like the pandemic in general, about why I'm so optimistic about movies. And it's because ultimately, I'm like, how much money would you spend to help preserve your ability to make $1 billion off of the release of a single product? So at that point, like, you can spend $100 million to prop up AMC or anything like that. So there's so much money to throw at the problem that's where my optimism comes from. But there's also something similar to what Marty's bringing up, which is that like, these cartoons are here to prop up a Marvel universe that can make $1 billion off of a single release. So all of a sudden, like, in that context, right? It's not that they'll spend anything, but the amount that is reasonable to spend is just beyond our comprehension, right?
Right.
All of a sudden, $1 billion is $1 million times 100, right? So it's like at that point, yeah. Oh, we'll throw $50 million at a 30-minute cartoon. It just makes sense. And then on top of it, the fact that the Marvel universe and the Star Wars universe are really propping up Disney Plus, the streaming service, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I find it really interesting to see how it is that they're going to facilitate being able to pump out the type of product that people would want to see on the volume of product that people would want to see on a streaming service to keep paying their subscriptions. And we kind of get this, we kind of know what it is, which is, if you're a Marvel fan and they want to keep you subscribing, they want to provide new content, one piece of new content every week.
And it's also content that the public has had quite a bit to say about what it looks like.
Exactly.
And that sort of recursive relationship that exists between audience and creators now, not just in terms of paying your dollar, but the internet test audiences. I personally am thrilled that the media world has gotten to the point where we can get these incredibly complex plots. And what I love about these what if stories is these are incredible. They might not look incredibly complex in 30 minutes, but when you look at all the threads of thousands of comic pages and hours of movie time that have all been brought together to give you this multi-layered story in 30 minutes, the creators are having a blast. I can guarantee you the creators are having a blast. And I'm personally am thrilled that there's an audience that digs on this level of nuance and complexity. That audience has always been there, but it's always had to filter its way through the movie, to the movie system, or through television systems where they have to create for a more general audience. But this sort of micro targeting of audiences where I pay a fee for a certain type of product, they're making money hand over fist. I'm not going to lie, but I love these stories. I love seeing them, and I love talking about them with people like you guys. This is the new campfire, and the species got where it is because it could take that campfire from one place to the next and tell the story the next night and make the day's labors a little more easy to bear. So I got to say, I love it. And I think this series really respects its audience. They're really challenging us to keep up with details and go back and watch it again, find stuff we missed. And that's treating us with respect, I think. So yeah, I think it's kind of fantastic, to be honest. Yeah. That wasn't supposed to be a non-starter, man. Boom, there's no mic drop there. My mic's on a stand. There you go. Yeah. Anybody else want to talk about favorite scene, favorite line, favorite character? If we've done that, we've done that, and that's fine.
I do want to say that I appreciated the brief cameo of Howard the Duck.
Drop the mic. What's that?
Also led to us getting to hear T'Challa call someone dude, which
yes
was pretty fantastic just in and of itself.
I think that's what they unraveled some layers of beauty in T'Challa, right?
Yep,
in other words, that beauty's always been there, but it had to express itself in this highly contested, difficult environment. And out there being a space raider, he was able to laugh, and you were able to see his dudeness come out, as it were. And it's the same guy, different context, right? And that was, like you said, terribly, terribly satisfying. Go have a drink with the Black Panther. That would be awesome. Anybody else? Line character?
I want to play the game.
Okay, so we're gonna play this game here. So we call the game What If, and tonight Sir Daniel Jun Kim is going to run the game What If. So I turn the mic over to you, sir.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, players. So I am going to read first the what if question that this week I was fortunate enough to be able to have the fun of choosing. So the question is, what if the Ravager spaceship, which in the episode abducts T'Challa, had instead accidentally abducted Killmonger as a child? Okay, so that was a question that everyone got. Now I'm going to read one by one 5 different answers. And as the facilitator, I myself am not going to play, but after reading each, the answer, we're going to go around to each person, and you're going to guess who said that, who gave that answer. Okay, we're going to do that like 5 different times.
Yep.
So once again, what if the Ravager spaceship had accidentally abducted Killmonger instead? Number 1, first answer. After finding the dead body of his father, Eric Killmonger is taken into space where he becomes Star-Lord. Fueled by a desire for vengeance, Killmonger Star-Lord goes on a quest for items of incredible power spoken only of in whispers, the Infinity Stones. One by one, he gets them, leaving death and destruction in his wake. Heroes rise and fall before him. Earth is his, except for one nation state, Wakanda. His forces united, Star-Lord breaches the barrier that separates Wakanda from the rest of the world, only to find a crater. The land, vibranium, everything is gone except for a recorded message from the Black Panther, pledging that someday the Maroon Republic of Wakanda will return. That's the answer. I gotta say, I love that nod to the Intergalactic Empire of Wakanda storyline. Number 2, nothing special would happen, because unlike T'Challa, who is trained from a very young age and who therefore has skills to offer the Ravagers, Killmonger would not yet have had the Black Ops training to make him an elite fighter. and his ideology would not yet have had the time to be radicalized from a lifetime of growing up in America witnessing injustice. He would simply have been a frightened child. And meanwhile, the Ravagers, seeing that he didn't have any special skills, would have let him go. And this would essentially be the same whether Killmonger's dad were still alive or not. End of answer. Okay, so that's number 2. So make your mental notes, if you will.
Making my notes.
All right, next one, number 3. The Ravagers would experience none of the redemption seen under T'Challa's leadership, or even eventually with Quill's influence. Rather, Killmonger would enable the Ravagers' worst instincts, encourage them toward greater and greater acts of violence. Given Killmonger's own fluency with violence, the Ravagers would emerge as one of the greatest threats to the galaxy, eclipsing even Thanos. As for Thanos, he would have no influence steering him away from his genocidal agenda, and his plans would continue unchallenged. Now, eventually, Killmonger would turn the Ravagers towards Earth, still fixated on reclaiming his birthright. He'd challenge for the throne of Wakanda, this time backed by an army from space. And after claiming the throne, he would turn his violent agenda toward the rest of the world, using the combined forces and technology of the Ravagers and Wakanda. Most of the Avengers would be killed, leaving no one suited to stopping Thanos once he obtains the Infinity Stones, ultimately resulting in the permanent death of half the universe. Joy.
Alrighty.
So that's number 3.
Yeah.
All right, take your mental notes. Number 4. Killmonger would have shown up in Wakanda with the Space Force, just as Thanos and the Black Order were attacking. Having heard rumors of Thanos' plan, Killmonger would pretend to join forces with Thanos, betray him, but ultimately be murdered as he attempted to stop Thanos from taking the Mind Stone from Vision. That's the answer, number 4. All right. And this is going to be the last one, number 5. Things would probably look a little more like the official Guardians of the Galaxy storyline, because Killmonger would not have been raised with a Wakandan philosophy and social structure. It may also depend on if he was abducted before or after his father's death. That's number 5. And just as a memory refresher, when we actually sort of go through, I'm going to sort of like quickly give like a few word summary. Number 1, again, that's the one about the Maroon Republic, coming back and finding that everything's gone except the message from the Black Panther talking about the Maroon Republic of Wakanda. Number 2, nothing special would happen because Killmonger is just a kid who's not yet radicalized, no special skills. Number 3, basically Killmonger would sort of use the combined technology of Wakanda and the Ravagers. Most Avengers would be killed, just utter doom and gloom. Number 4, Killmonger would have shown up in Wakanda, try to sort of usurp Thanos and take over instead, but he gets killed. Number 5, things would pretty much be like the Guardians of the Galaxy storyline, except with Killmonger as Star-Lord. I mean, just, yeah, because. Okay, so then we're going to go one by one and get everyone's answers. Eric, let's start with you. Who gave answer number 1?
All right. So here's, as we talked about last time.
Just
there
read
we
them,
are.
bro.
So you can see I did right.
Yeah.
1 Marty,
Okay.
2 Stanford, 3 Scott, 4 myself, and 5 Daniel.
So Daniel, you're keeping score, right?
I am keeping score. Yeah. Just don't go too fast so I can like
Cool
make sure.
beans.
Okay. So I got Eric's score tally. Next on my screen is Scott. So please go ahead and
Sure. I have 1 Stanford, 2 Marty, 3 Daniel, 4 Scott, and 5 Eric. Don't get to change your answers either, guys. You're stuck with what you got.
My pencil's right here.
There you go.
Okay. So I got Scott's total. Stanford.
I have 1 Stanford, 2 Eric, 3 Scott, 4 Marty, 5 Daniel.
I love it, man. We got some variability here. All righty.
Okay. And Marty.
Okay, I went with 1 Eric, 2 Stanford, 3 myself, 4 Daniel, 5 Scott.
I love it.
So number one, the answer was given by Stanford.
Snap.
Mhm. The one about the intergalactic Empire Wakanda thing.
I just put +1 on my paper. Thank you very much.
Number two, the one where nothing special happens. That's mine.
Brew his.
Number three is Marty's. Number four is Scott's.
Everybody gets at least 1 point, right?
It depends. Were you bold enough?
That is all.
It depends because it depends on if the player was bold enough to just claim their own as their own, or
There you
of just kind of, so not everyone did that. So
There you
number
go.
4 was Scott's.
Yep.
And number 5 was Eric's.
All righty.
So because I was lawful good, I got 0 points.
Because you didn't claim your own, yeah.
I'm not last.
That was chaotic neutral or whatever that was. I don't know.
That's when lawful good to get you in a bar fight, right?
Pretty much.
So now the winner of that then was Scott, because he got 3 points. Including
Sorry,
his own.
guys. My game, I cheated, but no. That was a hell of a good time. I tell you what, you guys gave some fantastic answers, man. That was a ton of fun.
I kind of want to argue about him. Like, I want to argue for mine. Like, nothing special would happen.
No. Well, if you want to argue about answers, go ahead.
Well, he had no training at that point. They would have captured him or abducted him accidentally. And he's a freak out because, like, freaking space aliens. They're gonna go, all right, we made a mistake. That's not Peter Quill. He's not gonna have that wanderlust like T'Challa did, right? It didn't have any of the special training like T'Challa did at that age. So he used to be a scared kid, and they'd be like, all right, can't do anything. Let's let him go.
Yeah, but the one time in Black Panther where he sees the spaceship, it's when T'Chaka is leaving and he goes up and his father is dead. And that actually becomes the impetus for all the events in the Black Panther movie. So I'm like, okay, he's gonna have the same desire for vengeance, but he's gonna be off in space. Yes. And we already know that he learned really well by the fact that he learned he went to MIT, learned from the CIA. So I'm like, okay, it's just gonna be space Killmonger. Exactly. And what would space Killmonger do? Well, he would do the same. I mean, him going and get the Infinity Stones is basically the space version of Killmonger. Because on the planet, on Earth, what did he do? He went to the place with the most technology, the most destructive power, went to take it over. So that was how I thought it through.
That's a great point about the spaceship. That's a great point. Although again, I think like without a lifetime on America, he wouldn't have been radicalized in the same way. But anyway, yeah.
But he would have wanted vengeance for his dad against Wakanda.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, but so that's one of the reasons why I put it dependent upon, was he abducted before or after his father's death? But also, once again, we don't necessarily see the early years of grief that he had. If he was surrounded by a social support network to help him navigate that grief and perhaps channel in a different way, right? So it's possible that being with the Ravagers, if they were, they could have also helped him with that. That's another option.
Yeah, see,
that's interesting too. Yeah, that's interesting.
Comes down to those initial conditions, because I simulated that he was abducted after the same night his father died, right? Because he saw the Wakandan ship take off, and for me that just meant there was another ship or whatever. And he's with a group of space pirates, and what I simulated him doing was coming back to Wakanda in this moment of struggle for Wakanda, and having a moment of identity crisis where he has to choose which side, the Wakanda or the Black Order. And so he ends up in that moment choosing choosing Wakanda over the Black Order, because he doesn't know them, right? He knows the guys on his ship. Anyway, tons of fun.
A question about your Scott, though. Why the specificity of the Mind Stone from Vision? He tries to stop. He gets killed while trying to stop Thanos from taking the Mind Stone from Vision. Was there a reason for that specificity?
Well, because that's the stone that was taken during the battle for Wakanda.
Oh,
So
right.
Killmonger would have been there
Sorry.
playing as if we were part of the Black Order, right? And sort of allied with Thanos because I'm on a vengeance kick against Wakanda. And then in the last minute, do something, that gets him killed. He tries to protect the Vision and gets killed and goes out a hero of sorts. But that's just a story. Anybody else want to riff a little bit on what they did there?
I think we're talking about the assumption of when he was kidnapped. I went in with the assumption that it was at least well enough after his father's death that he had formed some of the ideas that we see him having in the movie. Maybe not completely formed, but that anger is still there. So, and anger kind of rooted in the sense of injustice and still wanting to do something to correct that. Granted, I went to, took it to a fairly dark place, but honestly, and just for your listeners, the other possible question was basically, what if T'Challa becomes Black Panther after the events in the episode? And with that, I think I would have gone, everything is great. The earth is basically some kind of paradise. And then at the end of mine, everyone was still going to die because in that case, no one was keeping out an eye for ego. And that just kind of snuck in under everyone's radar. So clearly I just go to a dark place in all of these, probably in honor of the old What If comics that usually everything ends terribly. Everyone is dead except for Aunt May, who no writer will ever kill. So,
well, that's full circle back to Stanford's point about like it justifies the mainstream, the mainline canon. Like, okay, like any other what if scenario is bad, and
I actually think
or Marty's just a nihilist.
Well, both can be true.
I think a Wakanda that is allied with the Ravagers is going to be an even stronger Wakanda. And I think that in the end, the question is, can Wakanda take on ego better than the Guardians of the Galaxy? Well, I think Wakanda can outdo the Guardians of the Galaxy. You're talking about what it took to look, all it took to beat ego was freaking Peter Quill.
There was that sort of serendipity though, because of Quill, ego was on their radar because Quill is on ego's radar. Whereas that's what I think. I absolutely agree. Yes, Wakanda and the Ravagers together, way more qualified to take on ego. The question is, would they know this is happening?
Well, I think you notice when when someone starts expressing that kind of power anywhere in the world, right? And that was and part of the reason why ego was able to be beaten the first time was because eventually they figured out what he was, then they had to fight him. I think that I don't think that ego is really that much of a threat. If you can be taken out by Peter Quill and he's at the bottom of the totem pole, that means everybody else stands a better chance.
That is unassailable logic, I have to admit. But
I love it. And this is how the human brain evolved, right? This is why it evolved, to generate the simulations and the what if. I absolutely love it. Any final comments on the game, gentlemen?
Yeah, that was fun.
No, it's a lot better than last week. So that about wraps that up for tonight's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. What If crew members, please tell the audience where they can find you on social media, and we will start with Daniel.
Just Pop Mythology on Facebook and Twitter. Pop Mythology, all one word, should show up.
Fantastic. How about you, Eric?
You can find me on the Department of Psychology's website at Illinois State University, as well as on Twitter at Eric Wesselmann. And then you can find my film blog if you Google film culture, normal theater.
Fantastic. How about you, Stanford?
You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Clubhouse at SW Carpenter.
And What If crew, could we get a round of applause for our special guest, Dr. Marty Lloyd? Thank you for being here with us tonight. And where can people find you on social media?
Well, thank you for having me. And I tweet very seldom, but you can find me on Twitter at Marty_Lloyd.
That's fantastic. I'm on Twitter at dark_loops. You can find all episodes of the What If crew at the Dark Loops Productions page on YouTube. If you'd like to leave feedback about this episode, please do so on this YouTube page or send a message to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com, and we'll be sure to read it at the end of our next podcast. So there it is, from all of us to all of you. Big hugs And remember,
Wakanda
Wakanda forever.
forever.
Bye-bye.